It is June 12th, 2012. The camera is pointed west, and you're looking down a newly cut 2,600-foot runway. This runway stands on hallowed ground to some of us in the aviation community. It was put here by the first Aero Squadron Foundation with grassroots funding to honor the first Aero Squadron that began U.S. military operations here at the cradle of American air power on March 15th, 1916. Captain Benjamin Foulois and his squadron of airmen from Fort Sam Houston arrived by rail with 8 Jennies and their crews on that date, March 15th, 1916. At 9:30 in the morning, they removed one of the Jennies from the flat cars and assembled it, and Lieutenant Herbert A. Darg made the first U.S. military flight over foreign soil during a punitive expedition under General John J. Blackjack Pershing. So we have a new runway here, and I'm dedicating this little video to my friend who went west on November 4th last year, James R. Greenwood, whose abiding love and interest in this military expedition involving America's first use of air power inspired me to continue my interest in it. And for those of you that have the time and interest, look on the internet to the first Aero Squadron Foundation's site and see some pictures. Peter R. Westacott's magnificent painting of a Jenny in flight over this area. Read the biography of some of the guys that made this happen, led by Bill Weiner, president of the first Aero Squadron Foundation. This wouldn't be here without his love and interest in pushing us along the road. The camera is now pointed west-northwest toward the village of Columbus, New Mexico. You can see the black water tank dating way back. The mountains behind the water tank and extending to the east and northeast are the Hermanas Mountains. This runway sits about a mile or two southeast of the village. Camp Furlong, where the ground troops were stationed during the punitive expedition, is located generally south and a little bit west of the water tank. The new museum is located near the water tank. We have a museum in the railroad depot where Benny Foulois and the airplanes arrived, right near the water tank. There's lots to see. The old custom house dating back to before 1916. We, of course, are at about 4,000 feet in the middle of the Chihuahuan Desert. A lot of wildlife around here. Old jackrabbits running all over the place. It's an interesting place and a lot of history. We call this the cradle of American air power. We're looking east down the new runway here at Columbus. It amazes me that it's been abandoned and forgotten about all these years. Herbert A. Darg flew over that way into Mexico. He was killed on December 15th near Bishop, California, as a major general flying to Hawaii to take command of the U.S. Army military there. He ran into a mountain in a blizzard. The CAA established an auxiliary landing field here at Columbus. You're now looking at one of the day boundary marker sites on the north edge of the old auxiliary airfield. Also between the two day boundary markers you can see a cone with a lamp above it, and of course that was marked the boundary at night. In the early 1950s, a DC-6 climbing out of El Paso threw a propeller blade and made an emergency landing here with a full load of passengers. There were no injuries. That might have paid for the CAA's investment in this little landing area, auxiliary airfield. There's one of the northernmost boundary lamps, and we'll look down the north edge of the auxiliary strip, and we can see the day marker and see how it's lined up with the other markers off in the distance. This is another boundary light, still standing guard. A tribute to some of our old CAA pioneers. Little rusty, paint's much faded in the traditional colors, and the junction box is still under there. Lamp's gone. Quite an artifact. You could ask, what tie with civil aviation does all of this have? Guys like Benny Foulois and Darg and Billy Mitchell and Roscoe Turner and people of the Golden Age, they passed it along to us in a much safer version. But this is a very important part of the beginning. I am walking over to the arrowhead end of the ground marking system that went with the airway beacon in the standard package. Over behind these bushes was located the airway beacon tower. I'm sure it was one of the standard 51 footers with the flashing Morse code identifiers and all of that. That's some work ahead for our little project down here at Columbus. This is the other side of the bush, the back end of the arrowhead, and we swing around here and we can see some footings for structures, probably part of the airway beacon tower. Those are conduits going up, delivering power and signal instructions to the lights on top of the 51-foot tower. And now we're looking at the feather end of the arrow pointing toward El Paso, the area where the little generator building stood, which provided power for the various lamps on top of the tower, rotating beacon, flashing marker lamps, Morse code lamps, and then on top of that were the route markers pointing along the airway. These are the foundations for some buildings that were here, probably CAA buildings. Looks like a guy wire anchored here in the desert. We sure need an archaeologist and some historians around here. We're now looking at the generator building that was once out at the auxiliary airfield. You can see the two vents on top, which makes me believe there were two generators in here, since this was an auxiliary landing field. Many of the sites did not have a landing field, just the airway beacon. There's the underside of a marker lamp. And here, lying on its side, is a airway beacon. Still has some of the paint left on it. You can see there's a little catwalk about halfway up and the ladder along the side to access the top for lamp replacement and maintenance, etc. We are looking at the topmost end of the airway beacon tower. Not many of them left around anymore, I don't guess. Here are the lens holders. Lenses went here, 36-inch, as a power box. In the very early days, there was a marker lamp on there that flashed a Morse code signal, giving the identifier for this place. Here's the junction box. And also there was a route beacon that pointed east and west here, actually along any airway. And the pilots at 1,000 feet above the terrain were supposed to be able to see the next one back in the beginning. Here's a catwalk for maintenance. And I guess when you came up on that ladder, you had to have some agility to get around and onto the deck here. A little bit of history lying on its side near the railroad depot in Columbus, New Mexico. There's another view of the powerhouse with the two vents on top, sitting here with its companion piece, the airway beacon. With the Sun setting behind the Hermanas Mountains here at Columbus, New Mexico. I'm standing on the new runway, which was cut on June 9th, 2012. The end of the Hermanas mountain range. That's actually 3 peaks. This runway was cut and finished last Friday on June 9th, 2012. And thinking back to March of 1916, when the United States Army's Signal Corps, 1st Aero Squadron, operated from this very spot. It was the first combat air operations by any military unit involving a flight over Mexico, a foreign country. Commander of the unit, Captain Benjamin D. Foulois, went along as the observer. He later rose to command the United States Army Air Service. His pilot, then First Lieutenant Herbert A. Darg, later became a Major General. And Lieutenant Darg made that first flight, left us a great gift here at the cradle of American air power. On December 15th, 1941, then Major General Herbert A. Darg was killed in an airplane crash near Bishop, California. He was piloting a Bolo bomber en route to Hawaii at command of Hap Arnold and George C. Marshall. He was to relieve General Short, command of Army Forces Hawaii. General Short was in command the day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. This is where it all began, and I guess us old-timers, and particularly the guys in the 1st Aero Squadron Foundation, don't want it to be forgotten. To us, it's hallowed ground, and though all of those 11 pilots that came here in 1916 from Fort Sam Houston by way of Alpine, Texas, where they had a fire on the train, they did stop in El Paso and spent the night before arriving here on the 15th. They said they went to a show in El Paso. Quite a story, and we've only begun to uncover a little bit of it. Hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about our very early military aviation history in this country. Thank you. We're looking down into Mexico now. Pan around to the sun, which continues to set behind the Hermanas Mountains. We got a good steady wind out of the west. The station where Captain Foulois and his 1st Aero Squadron arrived on March 15th, 1916. And there you can see the recreation hall as it stood when General Pershing's units were here at Camp Furlong during the punitive expedition. That's the old customs house here in Columbus, some several miles north of the border. And we can see the new museum recently constructed at Pancho Villa State Park. A water tower dating back to the early days. More modern water tower. Neither of the water towers are in use. There are lots of things to see and do here in Columbus, the cradle of American air power. A lot of artifacts in that building.